Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk, especially since it's this time of year. I try to do this every year to talk a little bit about the Declaration of Independence and how that all came about, and adding a little story here and there. And it's an amazing thing when you think about how that all happened and how we actually did it. Um, it was truly a case of the mouse that roared, if you think about it. And how did we all go about this? I mean, there was a lot of derision and problems going on for a number of years. And finally, in 1774, we gathered together in Philadelphia in Carpenter's Hall and had what was called the First Continental Congress. In that, one of the firebrands was John Adams, and of course his cousin, Sam Adams, who were already looking toward pushing for independence. They were a small minority. Most were waving the olive branch and wanted to gain favor with the king. Well, in that assembly, they wrote something called the Writ, or the Declaration of Writs and Grievances. And John Adams was its author. It was our first declaration. It was sent to the king. He wasn't too happy about it. And then after that event, they all went back, and many, many things took place during that time. Of course, we started a war in 1775, conquered Lexington and Boston. It was all in New England, and a lot of people in this colony said it's a New England affair, and therefore it should stay a New England affair. And so we had the Second Continental Congress. And of course, John Adams, Sam Adams were there, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, so many more. And of course, there were so many that still wanted to wave the olive branch and stating that it's a New England affair. But war had taken place. Blood had been spilled. And so John Adams, who belonged to every committee in the Continental Congress, I mean, he was involved in everything. He was the dynamo for independence. I mean, if you didn't have John Adams, I don't know if we would have had it. He was that important. And it's kind of amazing that today you don't see statues of him, you don't hear much about him, you don't realize of the amazing journey that we took because of this individual. And one of the first things that John Adams did in that Second Continental Congress said we need a general. And he nominated George Washington. Now, why do you think he nominated George Washington? Of course, it helped that George Washington came to every meeting dressed in his military garb. And he wanted to be the commander. But so did John Hancock. But the thing is that John Adams rightly understood that if he nominated John Hancock, it would remain a New England affair. And so, very, very shrewdly, he nominated George Washington. It was seconded, and George Washington acquiesced reluctantly, as it was often the way he would say it. And off he went to Boston to start to fight the war. Then, working with other committees, finally working with a few people, they got Richard Henry Lee to go to Virginia. Because all of a sudden, you have to remember something. Let's get Virginia going, because all of a sudden, it's no longer a New England affair. George Washington is the commander. Therefore, it's not just New England, it's Virginia. And Virginia is a very powerful colony. And so he sent Richard Henry Lee, the ever-gesturing Richard Henry Lee, used to practice his gestures in front of a mirror. He's an interesting character. And he went down and got the backings of the delegates from Virginia and came back with Lee's resolution, which said that these colonies are, and of a right ought to be, free and independent states and absolved of all their allegiance to the British Crown. There we were. And then John Adams, of course, got together a group to write a declaration on Lee's resolution, and he nominated Thomas Jefferson. Why? He knew Thomas Jefferson was a great writer, but he was also a Virginian. Once again, add to the cohesive worth of what you have. If he wrote it, it would have been a New England idea, a New England declaration. It was the most brilliant thing. And Thomas Jefferson did not want to do it, but he eventually did it. And there was a committee, many people, Roger Sherman, Livingston, Franklin, and Adams, and of course Jefferson. And they took Jefferson's raw notes, cleaned it up a little bit, and then they brought it before Congress, which eviscerated it. They took out lots of things because, first off, we had different sections of the country, and the South wanted slavery. The North said, if we're freeing all men here, all mankind, that means every person. And the South walked out. And this was a very, very bad affair. This could have killed everything. And Franklin, in conference with Adams, with Sam Adams, and a few others, they debated and talked. And Franklin more or less said that let's create a country. Then let us work on taking care of the ills. But you got to start with the country. And so very reluctantly, Adams said, okay. Of course, the word okay didn't exist back then. But he said, all right. But you get the idea. And so they met with the Southern delegates and acquiesced to their demands. And then they battled, argued, and kind of tweaked the Declaration. And then an amazing thing happened. There were still lots of arguments, but it was a very foul day, July 2nd, 1776. Tremendous thunder and lightning storms, and amazing wind, and rain, and everything. And through that storm, John Adams gave this amazing, remarkable, inspiring speech, which absolutely mesmerized every person in that Congress. And when he finished, they were ready to sign. And they did. All but New York. They basically reluctantly abstained. But this is the important thing, that they finally got the vote for independence. And what was the date? July the 2nd. This is where everything happened. And what happened on the 4th? Nothing. You know, it's an interesting thing when you think about it. What happened on July 4th? The printer finished printing copies of the Declaration of Independence. And so instead of putting the 2nd, he put the day that he finished it, and that was July 4th. And that's why we celebrate July 4th, because the printer put the date on it. But all the drama, everything, all the battles, all the vote, the action took place July 2nd, 1776. It was a very, very delicate, difficult thing. And finally, the vote took place, and then they scattered. They had to. They had all committed treason. And several of them would die because of their actions on the Declaration. But July 2nd, as John Adams wrote to his wife, will be a day of celebrations, parades, and fireworks, and cannons roaring. Well, he was right, but the printer won out. And then 50 years after the work of that printer, on July 4th, 1826, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson died, hours apart from each other on that remarkable date. And from 1826 on, there's never been an argument for what day will be Independence Day, because Adams and Jefferson, who were the North and South of independence, who were the two hemispheres, who were the 2 points on the globe of independence, died together. And from that point on, July 4th is the date. But if you really want to know the truth, it was July the 2nd. And there was many things to do, many great things to take care of. They wanted to get rid of that problem called slavery. And it took generations and a lot of real nasty situations. And there were threats constantly that the South would secede, going all the way back to the 1820s. And finally it went to war. And finally 700,000 people had to die to finally solve that situation. And of course, it's an ugly situation. It's a scar that's part of this nation. You know, I'm always reminded what Sam Adams said in the very beginnings of these comments on slavery during the time before they did the Declaration of Independence. He said, if you do not deal with the issue of slavery now, 100 years from now, you will be forced to deal with it. He couldn't have been more right. In fact, that's probably one of the most profound things that were said. That was said, at that early convention. You know, people didn't believe he said it, and then they did research, and they found he did. It's really quite remarkable. And so, yes, with all of its faults and all of its problems, they fixed the nation, and it grew and became something amazing, this remarkable republic. It's not a democracy. It has never been a democracy. It will never be a democracy. It is a democratic republic. And it's the oldest democratic republic around right now. Our Constitution is the oldest Constitution around. And it's a living, breathing document. It's constantly changing and being interpreted in new and interesting ways. But I hope that many of you just might give thought to the amazing nature of our Declaration and the amazing people that gave everything, and in many cases they did. How many of those people involved in the Declaration of Independence and the Revolution ended up in poorhouses, ended up in debtor's prison? Several of them. Some of them gave their fortune to make the revolution work, and they never got paid back 1 cent. We don't hear about that part. But there was a lot of giving and a lot of trying to create something good. And yeah, as I said, it's flawed. Every government's flawed. There's no such thing as a perfect utopia, and there never will be. But this was a pretty good shot in the Age of Enlightenment by men who were only men, who created something that was truly and amazingly remarkable.